Excellent. I like hearing this. So, welcome. My background is paleontology, so I'm going to be talking about some stuff that is definitely in my field and a topic I've been paying some attention to over the years, as both in graduate school and afterwards. As paleontology, and especially this issue, is a very dynamic one. Lots of things are changing rather quickly, and so hopefully this will be a chance to get you all kind of up to speed on where the debate is over dinosaurs and feathers and birds. And what does that mean for young Earth creationism? And so we'll begin with prayer, and then we'll get into our presentation. Father, I am grateful and thankful for the opportunity to be here with these people, and I pray that you would bless us together. Help me, Lord, in my presentation, that I would be clear and understandable and explain things well, and that, Lord, together we might be able to look at the things of your creation and glorify you because of what you have made and what you have done. In your name we pray. Amen. So fuzzy with a chance of feathers. See, the question that I'd like to walk us through here today is whether or not dinosaurs have feathers, and if they do or if they don't, what does that mean for creationism? This is a topic that you'll see pop up on the major ministry websites from time to time. Anytime somebody says we've got a dinosaur with fossils, there's usually a response article that comes up at some point pretty soon. And so I'd like to give a perspective that is perhaps a little bit different from some of my creation colleagues, but nonetheless is one that I think will help us move forward in this question. Well, to answer the question, do dinosaurs have feathers, we must first ask the question, what is a dinosaur? We've got to define what that actually means. We have to ask, what is a feather? Now, that's a pretty obvious one for the most part, but I hope to surprise you at least a little bit. And then we can ask the question, do dinosaurs have feathers? And then ask, what does that mean for creationism? So this is the flow of the presentation. We'll come back to this title slide to kind of just mark off where we are and where we're moving as we go through here. So starting off with, what is a dinosaur? All right, God created a lot of different types of animals out there. And dinosaurs are, of course, animals. They're not plants or fungus or protists or bacteria or various sorts of things. They are animals. But there are lots of different types of animals. So when we're asking the question, what is a dinosaur, we got to narrow this down from not only the living sorts of things that are out there, but the extinct ones as well. So dinosaurs, first and foremost, as animals, are vertebrate animals. And that means that we're going to lose a couple of the critters up over here. So the jellyfish and the spider, they go away because they are not animals that have backbones, right? When we think about vertebrate animals, we think mostly about things with rigid bone and spines and things like that. So everything up over here is a vertebrate animal, but obviously not everything is a dinosaur, despite what the packet O dinosaurs was, and what that included when I was a kid. That packet O dinosaurs contained a lot of non-dinosaurian things, right? There was the saber-toothed tiger in there and the woolly mammoth and the dimetrodon and whatnot. So how do we know that those aren't dinosaurs? Well, dinosaurs are, in particular, amongst vertebrates, they are tetrapods. And that word means 4 feet, right? So any of the animals that have 4 feet and a backbone count, which means that our fish don't. So dinosaurs are not fish. No, so far, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial. They are also a group of tetrapods that we call diapsids. Now, this is where you start getting a term that you won't see in most textbooks because it's a more technical one. It refers to how the skull construction looks like amongst especially reptiles, but also some other types of things. Diapsids are animals that lay eggs or give live birth. They're in that kind of category of stuff that have a pair of holes on the top of the skull behind the eyes and a pair of holes behind the eyes on the side of the skull. So they've got 2 pairs of paired holes, if you will. And that's why we have the word diapsid. It means 2 pairs of these holes. And so we're going to lose mammals, we're going to lose amphibians, but we still have all of our reptiles as well as birds are inferred to have come from this from an evolutionary perspective. Not that I agree with that, but nonetheless, as we follow our taxonomy. So we got snakes, we got dinosaurs, we got birds, pterosaurs, a lot of other things. So dinosaurs are further a group within the diapsids that we call archosaurs. Archosaurs is a word that means ruling reptiles, I like that. And this is going to separate us from the lizards and the snakes. The lizards and the snakes are a different group of the diapsids that are in what we call the lepidosaurs, basically your lizard side of things, versus your croc side of things. So when we think about the types of reptiles, for example, that are out there, dinosaurs are far more like crocodilians than they are like reptiles. So even though the word dinosaur means terrible lizard or terrible reptile, no one ever assigned dinosaurs to lizards. It was just, that's the reptile kind of term in Latin. So we've got dinosaurs along with pterosaurs, birds, and crocs in this group that we call the archosaurs. Now, so you understand that this isn't just an arbitrary bin. I'm going to walk you through a couple of the physical features in the skeleton that help define the group that we call the archosaurs. So this is a picture of an archosaur called Euparkeria, and you may be able to see a skeleton of this at the Field Museum. I'm not sure if Euparkeria is there. I know Herrerasaurus is, and that's a dinosaur. We'll see a few pictures from the Field Museum because, after all, I'm in Chicago. I might as well, show what we got. So here's a couple of things that help us define what it means to be an archosaur. One thing is called, and we're going to get into Latin here, an antorbital fenestra. So ante is a Latin word that means in the front of. If you visit some big house, they have an anteroom or an antechamber. It means it's kind of the place where you step into before you get into the house. It's out in the front. Orbit refers to the eye hole in the skull. So an antorbital fenestra is an opening in the skull that's in front of the eye area. And that's this area circled in green right here. All archosaurs, whether they're dinosaurs or crocodilians or pterosaurs, for example, have this hole that's out in front of the eye, in between the eye and the nostril area, what we call the nares. All of the archosaurs also have teeth that are set in sockets. So our teeth are set in sockets, but in a rather different way than any of these reptile groups. So there is a cup in which the tooth grows and rises up through, which is a different situation than we see in lizards. Lizard teeth might start on the inside of the jaw and migrate their way out, or they might grow directly on top of the jaw. But lizard teeth aren't set in little cups in the same way that crocodilian teeth are and that dinosaur teeth are. So all the archosaurs have this feature. They also have a femur, right, our thigh bone, that is gently S-shaped. It's got a pair of curves to it that come in and out a little bit. So you got this kind of little curvature. And on the femur is a thing called a trochanter. That simply means a little ridge of bone that sticks up. And that ridge of bone that sticks up attaches muscles from the leg out to the tail. So it's a attachment point that goes backwards for the muscles here. And if you've watched the Jurassic Park or Jurassic World movies, and I hope you have, you know from a lot of the ways that dinosaurs are depicted now that dinosaur tails tend to sway back and forth as they move. And the reason why that happens is actually because of that little fourth trochanter. The muscle for the leg attaches onto the tail so that every time the leg steps forward, it actually pulls the tail a little bit to one side. And then as the next leg steps forward, it pulls the tail to the other side. And the whole effect is to gently move the tail back and forth every time we see an animal take a step. And of course, dinosaur tails are held up off of the ground, but you could even see this slightly if you watch a video of a crocodile moving. You'll see that tail sway just a little bit because it's connected to the legs. And the last point that I'll note here that is connecting our archosaurs as a group is on the vertebrae of the tail. Now, if you feel on the back of your own back, right, go ahead and stick your hand along there and you feel, yeah, this is interactive part. Feel along your back, you've got those little bumps of your spine, right? And those are called a neural arch, right? For the archosaurs, the neural arch on the tail vertebrae flare out a little bit front to back. So rather than just being straight, they move that way. And that allows extra attachment area for tendons. And those tendons help archosaurs to hold their tails a little bit more up off of the ground than lizards do. At my house, we have a skink in a terrarium. My daughter captured it to be a companion to a lady skink that I had captured the year before. Sadly, the lady skink didn't make it. She was rather old and cancerous. But nonetheless, we still have her boyfriend. But if you look at a skink, you look at a lizard, right, the tail just drags along the ground. But if you watch a video of a crocodile, crocodile tails stay parallel for a little bit before they drop down and hit the ground. And that's because of these expansions on the neural arch that give extra point for support for that tail. And in the dinosaurs, for example, the tails are held completely off the ground because the tendons are strong and run down the length of the tail. And so they use their tails as counterbalances or other sorts of things. So this is what, for me as a paleontologist, if somebody is telling me we're looking at an archosaur, I have these things in my mind as, okay, this is the big category. Now, inside the archosaurs, what one are we looking at? Well, because there's a few, right? Birds, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, and crocodilians are some of the big groups that are kind of considered to be part of archosaurs. In the fossil record, for example, there are 54 families of crocodiles. 54 families of crocodiles. We don't have that many. We've got crocodiles, we've got alligators, and we've got gavials. That's it. But in the fossil record, some crazy diversity. So how do we further distinguish our dinosaurs from our other things? Well, dinosaurs are a group called ornithodyrans. This is the group that includes not the crocs. This is going to include the dinosaurs and the pterosaurs, and they're united by certain skeletal features as well. Notice birds are still here. And when we get to dinosaurs proper, that's when we lose the pterosaurs. Pterosaurs are not dinosaurs, even though they were in my bag of prehistoric stuff. They are not dinosaurs, in part because, say, dinosaurs keep their legs directly underneath them. Pterosaurs splay out their arms and their legs, more like crocodiles do. So there's some anatomical differences. Now, birds are still here because birds have more in common with dinosaurs anatomically than they have with anything else out there. And from my evolutionary colleagues' standpoint, they believe that that's the case because they think that birds evolved from dinosaurs. I don't think that's the case, but I do recognize that their anatomy is most similar. And so in one sense, you can say that birds are dinosaurs because as we get these bins and these boxes, birds are still falling under the description of skeletons that we do with dinosaurs. But on the other hand, of course, birds are rather different from dinosaurs. Think of it in much the same way that we might use the term mammal. Right? A mammal is a big term that includes lots of things that are not related to one another. Right? From a creation standpoint, we recognize that bats and shrews are different created groups, that cattle are different created groups from, say, carnivores of different types. So dinosaur might be a big, huge category that includes things like birds in it. So how do we define dinosaurs? Well, this is an image from Festovsky and Weischampel's book, The Evolution and Extinction of the Dinosaurs. I picked this one because it's a good book, and also my advisor was Festovsky. So, you know, I kind of want to make sure that I use his things and let him know I still like him. Dinosaurs are defined on the basis of a couple of physical traits and features. So here we're looking at a humerus. That's your upper arm bone. And on the humerus is a little expansion of bone called a deltopectoral crest. I'm throwing a lot of terms here. But think about our muscles, right? The deltoid is up here for us. Pectoralis muscle is here. The deltopectoral crest is simply the little ridge of bone on the humerus that attaches those muscles. So paleontologists and anatomists use a lot of specialized terms, but when it comes down to it, it's just Latin for describing something pretty normal. So we've got a deltopectoral crest. All dinosaurs have this little ridge of bone up over here connecting these muscles. They also, of course, have hips. This is a side view into a dinosaur hip. And this is the cup. Oops. C over there is the cup where the femur goes into. So as you know, dinosaurs walking, the leg bone connects to the hip bone, right, is the silly old song. Now, in our bodies, we have a ball to our femur that sits inside the cup of our hip. And technically, the ball of our femur is coming off of the side of the femur. It's the head of the femur comes up, and the ball of the femur comes out from the side. Dinosaurs are standing upright a little bit differently. The head of their femur actually curves inward, rather than having a ball come out from the side. But it's doing the same thing. It's sitting in this cup. And in that cup, the bones meet, but there's a little space where the bones don't meet entirely. So there's a hole right over here in the middle of that cup. And all dinosaurs have a hole in the middle of that cup. It's called a perforated acetabulum, if you want to get technical about it. But yeah, hole in the hip. There's also a little shelf on the top of the hip. This is a bone called the ilium. And there's a little expansion over there that helps to add some muscle emplacement spots. This is the tibia on the far side. The tibia is your shin bone. And the tibia has got a couple of features. One of them is an ankle bone that actually wraps around the front of the end of the shin. And that's the astragalus. We have an astragalus in our ankle as well. Our calcaneum is the ball, the big ball at the end of our foot, the heel. And the astragalus is a bone that's right next to it. In the dinosaurs, they have those bones, but they're arranged a little bit differently. Their calcaneum is actually rather small and just an ankle bone. It's not part of the actual stepping down apparatus. And their astragalus is pretty big, and it wraps up over top of the tibia. And every dinosaur out there, from T-Rex to Triceratops, has got this sort of thing. So next time you're at a museum, take a look at the leg. You know, the skull, spend more time on the skull. It's important, right? But take a look at the legs, and you will see these different features. So a couple of pictures from the Field Museum here in Chicago. We've got Daspletosaurus, which is a close cousin to T-Rex. We have Protoceratops, which is a very small horned dinosaur. So think of our Triceratops, but this guy's little. He's only about the length of this table. Very lightweight. Camarasaurus is one of our long-necked sauropod dinosaurs. And then Parasaurolophus is one of the duckbills. And these are the sorts of things that just might have been in your bag o' prehistoric life. These ones have been known for a long time. 4 different, very different types of dinosaurs, and yet all of them have these physical features to them. And you can see, for example, on the T-Rex, here's where the orbit is. That's where the eye is going to be. And here's that antorbital fenestra. So it's an archosaur. It also has another one out in front of that, actually, before you eventually get to the nostrils. Oops, sorry. My cursor's jumping around here. So there's the nostrils, the antorbital fenestra. There's the orbit. Here's one of those temporal fenestra that define the diapsids. That's the one on the sides behind the eye. And then it has another one that you don't see that's on top of the head. And Camarasaurus shows the same sort of stuff. It's just arranged a little different. That giant teardrop sort of thing, that's the eye. That's the antorbital fenestra. And that's its nares. That's the nose. And there's the side one. And there's the top one for the ones behind the eyes. So we also know that dinosaurs stood upright. That's a characteristic that we typically see with dinosaurs, but we see it in a few other things that aren't dinosaurs or aren't quite dinosaurs. So it doesn't define them, but it is characteristic, right? Dinosaurs didn't splay out on the side. Now, for my evolutionary colleagues, they use a method of evaluation called cladistics. This is their way of trying to determine evolutionary relationships amongst things. And what it does is it takes these physical features and it numerically codes them so that they can run it through a computer program. So, for example, if we go back just a moment and we ask a question of the tyrannosaurid that's up there, do you have an antorbital fenestra? If no, we would code that as a 0. If yes, we would code that as a 1. And this would get coded as a 1. All the dinosaurs would get a coding for a 1 on that, but the lizards, for example, would get coded as 0 because they don't have something like that. And we do that for dozens, sometimes hundreds of different sorts of anatomical details. This is very fine resolution stuff. And it results in a big, huge data matrix on an Excel spreadsheet that's got hundreds of characters and dozens of species and things like that. And then all of that is run through a computer program that is going to make trees. Because following Darwin's idea of universal ancestry, evolutionists are interested in what they believe to be the tree connections of all life, right? And in one of these, you're going to see the animals up at the top, and then you're just going to see a tree underneath them. So this assumes the continuity of all life. All of my evolutionary colleagues think that all life has some connection to every other bit of life. There's nothing that isn't connected that was separately created from anything else. So a cladogram of the dinosaurs, for example, a simple cladogram of the dinosaurs would look something like this. If you had a high school biology textbook, you'd see an illustration something like this to represent, various connections to life forms. And so there's our node for dinosaurs. It means that everything going up this way and this way would be anatomically considered part of that dinosaurian group. Further down, we have the archosaurs. So there's our crocodiles, but they're not dinosaurs, but they are archosaurs. So this node here is defining that group. Oops. And then you move up. The ornithodyrans includes the pterosaurs. Then you get more well-defined and you're into the dinosaurs. And you've got some dinosaurs like your horned dinosaurs, your duckbills, etc., that are over on this particular group called the ornithischians. Those are almost all plant-eating dinosaurs of various types. Stegosaurus is in there, for example. But then you have your other dinosaurs, the saurischians, and that includes your meat-eating dinosaurs and your long-necked sauropods. So they're further classified into their own groups by getting more detailed about their anatomy. And you'll see that birds is over there on the far side because my evolutionary colleagues believe that certain meat-eating dinosaurs were the stock from which the birds evolved. And so that's the logic that they have about why they would say that birds are dinosaurs, why you hear that said in the news, said on Jurassic World and things like that, that birds are living dinosaurs because they believe it's from dinosaurs that the birds evolved. Now, creationists look at things a little bit differently, obviously, than this, and we employ a method called baraminology. This comes from two Hebrew words, bara, which is the word that is associated with create, with God. Humans especially never bara in the Bible, only God bara. When it says in the beginning God created, that's the Hebrew word bara. It's only ever used with the Lord. The Hebrew word min is the word for kind. So when God talks about having made kinds of beasts of the field or kinds of plants, that's just the Hebrew word for min. It's very plastic. It means kind, just like our word means kind. It could be kinds of spoons, kinds of desks, or kinds of paper, right? So it's a young earth creationist approach to taxonomy that is, like the evolutionists, going to be character-based. I am perfectly happy to grab those data sets that my evolutionary colleagues have built that describe all these different physical features and run with a different computer program that doesn't make trees, but is actually interested in clusters. So you can use the same data and evaluate it using different methods to ask different types of questions. With living animals, we also get the benefit of things like hybridization data. Turns out that lots of animals on the earth are able to hybridize with one species and another when the species are fairly similar to one another. As an example, horses and donkeys, right, can hybridize and they produce a mule. Now, a mule is a sterile animal most of the time. Horses can also hybridize with zebras. Donkeys can hybridize with zebras. So there is a network of hybridization amongst animals that we recognize as horses, and they don't have to produce a viable offspring in order for that hybridization to count. We can at least see that it happens. There are over 60 species of cats in the world today. Most of them are fairly small. We go to the zoo to see the ones that are fairly big. But most of the species of cats are fairly small, and hybridization can actually connect every single one of them. Now, Boots the cat is not going to be able to mate with Leo the lion. But nonetheless, through a series of connections, you can actually see hybridization connections across the entirety of what seems to be a cat kind. So when Noah brought cats on the ark, he probably brought 2 cats on the ark, and from those 2 cats, we have the multitude of species alive today, and hybridization is the evidence that they are not so distant from one another. Now, we can't do that with fossils. If I take 2 little trilobites and we put them in a drawer and we leave them overnight with some nice music and maybe a movie to watch, I still don't get more trilobites the next day. That's not what happens. So for paleontologists, we can't rely on hybridization data or anything like that. We have to simply define species according to the physical forms of the fossils. So a contrast, a way of thinking about it, is that my evolutionary colleagues think of life as a giant tree. Creationists think of life as an orchard of trees. And we refer to this as a creation orchard or something like that, where each of these independent trees were created by God, but there is connections between them. There is a cat orchard tree. There is a dog orchard tree. Those 2 trees don't connect to one another. Their roots don't intermingle. But the living dog species are part of a kind. The living cat species are part of a kind. There are going to be a multitude of dinosaur kinds, probably over 50. there are several hundred bird kinds, for example. So this is a way that we can think about the world as it is today and also the world of the fossil record and recognize both continuity and discontinuity. Darwin was right about some things. He was right to challenge the idea that species are their own thing and each was made by God specially. The evidence was pushing against that, and what Darwin recognized as good evidence that species were not the created thing, he went too far and said, therefore, they're all connected. He saw the evidence for some connection and then applied it to everything. And that was, I think, one of his mistakes. Okay, so now that we know what dinosaurs are, they're specifically defined things based on anatomy, we can ask a quicker question to get through, and what is a feather? Well, a feather is what we call integument. That is, it's something that is on the skin. Hair is integument, for example, but it's not feathers. Hair and feathers are constructed differently. They're made of different stuff. So feathers are anchored to the skin, not to the bone. They don't grow out of the bones, though as we'll see, they can affect what the bones look like. Feathers are also hollow. For a few years, we had chickens at our house until one of our neighbors was so infuriated with them occasionally getting into her yard that we were forced by law to get rid of them. Well, by threat of law, anyway. She's troublesome. Anyway, so were some of the chickens, but really, being taken to court for fowl at large, that was over the top. And yes, that was actually on the citation, fowl at large. I thought my little chicken had like some sort of bandito, bandana on him or something. Like, really? Wow, you got a wanted poster? Nonetheless, in order to keep our chickens from getting into other people's yards, we clip their wings. Now, when we say that, what we're not meaning is that we don't cut the bones. We don't actually affect the deeper anatomy. We're simply trimming the feathers. And when you trim a feather, what you find is that the feather shaft is hollow. Next time you find a bird feather out in the yard or at a park, bring it home, look at it with a magnifying glass, look at it under a microscope if you've got one of those, take a scissors to it, snip it, take a look at its anatomy. It's a fascinating item that just screams design in all sorts of ways. So it's a hollow structure that grows out of the skin, and it's composed of the protein keratin. Now, our hair and our fingernails are made of keratin as well, but bird feathers are interesting because they're only made out of one type of keratin called beta-keratin. You might see that on the supplement aisle of Walmart or GNC or any of those sorts of places. And beta-carotene is one of the components that help. It's a protein material that makes up our hair and our fingernails, but we have both alpha and beta. Feathers only have beta-carotene. That's all they're made up of. And that's a helpful indicator for when we're trying to ask questions about, is this a feather or not? So, for example, here's a picture of a couple of different feathers of a magpie tail feathers from a neat little website. The U.S. government actually has an atlas of bird feathers. It's really pretty. It's a neat one to hunt around on. And feathers on the tail are all veined feathers. That is, they have a hard shaft going down the middle, and then you've got the fibers coming off of the sides. And depending on where you are on the tail feather of magpie, the vein might be more towards one side or more straight down the center. That's going to be dependent on whether or not it's being helped, whether it is helping in the aerodynamics of things. Likewise, on the wings, this is also magpie, so you can see the differences. It's got blue-green iridescent tail feathers on the back, and the wing feathers are white and black, very stark contrast to it. All the feathers on the wing have a vein, and that vein is always oriented towards one side. It's out in the front leading edge because that is going to give rigidity and stiffness to the feather as it is involved in flight. It also helps to shape the feather a little bit so that it's like a plane wing, right? It helps to generate lift. So these are the types of feathers that we most frequently consider. And also the feathers that cover the body on the outside are veined feathers, and they typically are symmetrical. The vein comes down the middle with the fibers coming off the side because they're not involved in flight. They're just covering the animal, helping air to move over it. But there's other types of feathers as well. Anybody have a down comforter or a down pillow? Right? And they're lovely, soft, fluffy. You occasionally get stabbed by something little in there. You're like, what's the deal? Well, that's the very bottom of the down. That's the part where it's anchoring into the skin of the bird. but it doesn't have a solid vein that comes out from there. Instead, it just frays out like mad. And this is great insulation. And birds need that because birds are warm-blooded like we are. In fact, their body temperature typically runs about 102 to 103 degrees. They're about 4 to 5 degrees higher temperature than we are. They need that activity level to maintain active flight. All their proteins are geared towards a higher body temperature than that. That would kill us if we were sustaining body temperatures at 103 for a long period of time. Eventually, your brain would start to fizzle out. It would be bad. But they're tuned to a higher temperature, and down helps to keep their body heat in. And it's actually more effective than fur. So it's very, very effective stuff. And it's also lovely and comfortable, right? So goose down, we get that. Why do goose need it? Well, because geese live in northern climates. And they also tend to live in the water, and water sucks heat away from you very quickly, right? In fact, interesting situation, flamingos, right? Flamingos, you always see them in the classic pose, one leg up. Why do they do that? It's heat regulation. They put 2 feet in, they actually lose more heat into the water, so they put 1 foot in, and that's all. Fascinating stuff that goes on with organisms. So these are the sorts of feathers that we're accustomed to. There's another type of feather out there. A vein-only feather, a bristle. And in the case of most birds, these are found up around the eyes. They don't have, they're more or less like eyelashes in a way. They're a simple, straight feather that simply has a vein, that's all. In some birds, they're particularly astute, they're particularly prominent, such as the types of birds that will chase insects in midair, such as this flycatcher. You'll also be able to see good-sized ones on something like an ostrich or an emu because they're big birds. You look around the eye, you'll see a few of these straight feathers, typically on the face, called rictal feathers. So feathers are a little bit more diverse than sometimes we think, right? I always thought about the one feather, and yeah, there's the down, but there's also these little fibers. So now that we know what dinosaurs are, now that we've got an idea of what a feather can look like in the modern animals, we can now ask our question. Do dinosaurs have birds? Well, the key players are these dinosaurs, the theropods. These are the meat-eating dinosaurs. T-Rex is a theropod. The maniraptorans, so raptor, we know Jurassic Park, the velociraptor. Well, there's a big category of animals in which the velociraptor is just one. And of course, we have the question of the famous fossil Archaeopteryx. From an evolutionary perspective, this is a cladogram. It's tipped on the side. It's not sticking up like the other one was. But nonetheless, here we've got our theropods, include all these. Our long-necked sauropods are out this way. Maniraptorans is this yellow dot. It includes all these things. And these images on the side indicate what sort of feathers have been identified in what types of dinosaurs. It's quite a few. And a growing number. We have basically, this symbol indicates fuzzy sorts of stuff. The next illustration is that there are veined feathers, what are called pennaceous feathers, but the ones with veins. And then these are veined feathers that seem to be organized into some wing-like structure, including wings that might allow the animal to fly or glide in some way. So this is a lot. This is a whole lot. So let's look at a couple examples. These are the different types of feathers that have been inferred to be found amongst dinosaurs in the fossil record. The ones that are circled, we have some questions as to whether those are legitimate fossil types of feathers or whether or not they're an artifact of when feathers get compressed and preserved. Do they end up looking kind of weird sometimes? So there's at least 5 and possibly as many as 8 different feather structures that people are saying dinosaurs have. I would say at least 5, probably maybe one of the others, but probably not too many more. And we're going to look at a couple of different dinosaur fossils over here. Anywhere from the Tyrannosaurids through oviraptors, through the Troodontids and the Dromaeosaurs. And these are all dinosaurs that you might see somewhere in Jurassic Park. These are a couple of pictures of some Tyrannosaurids or Tyrannosauroids, so similar to T-Rex in many ways, not T-Rex itself. And this one over here is Dilong, found from China, and along the tail are these fuzzy things. These are impressions of some type of material that is elongate, looks kind of like hair of some type. And it's found on a few other places along the fossil, but the tail showed these pretty well. This other tyrannosaurid, come back over here, called Eutyrannus. Well, it had a whole bunch of fuzz all over the top of the skull. I don't have a good picture of that would show up here, but I've looked at high-resolution images of this, and it seems to have fuzziness all along its head. And then it's got fuzziness in other places. Also along the tail, there's fuzz here. Other impressions nearby the body itself and along some of the other bones. All these little lines here, when you get a good picture, you're looking online, you're able to blow this thing up. They've taken very high-resolution photographs. There's stuff on the rock right next to the body that isn't away from the body. Okay, there's something going on with these things. An ornithomimid, this is, if you remember the first Jurassic Park movie. How many of you saw the first Jurassic Park movie? Okay, good. So they were out in, the paleontologist and the two kids are out in a big field, and there's a bunch of dinosaurs that start running around them, and they say, looks like they're flocking our way, and they start running, and it's Gallimimus. Well, Gallimimus is in this particular group. This is the ornithomimids. The name means bird mimics because these animals look like gigantic dinosaurian ostriches. So their names tend to be things like that. Gallimimus means rooster dinosaur, but Gallimimus is something that's like 15 feet tall with a long neck, but it had no teeth, and that was one of the things that seemed reminiscent about birds. It didn't have a beak, but it didn't have any teeth. And likewise, a bunch of fuzzy things are found all along around side the body of this specimen, this particular one coming from Canada. And small little indentations and markings on the bone. So remember I said feathers don't grow from the bone, but they can actually affect the physical structure of the bone a little bit. And one of the things that we often see is that there's often little dimples and pits around bones when there are lots of feathers. And so this animal was reconstructed to look like that, which is not what I grew up looking at as far as dinosaurs go. This is a lot fuzzier, fluffier, and it seemed like it had longer feathers around the arms. And so they interpret that as something that looks more like wing feathers, but this animal's certainly not flying. It's way too big. This thing is taller than I am. It weighs more than I do, and getting that off of the ground would be pretty impossible. So this is a ground-dwelling dinosaur that does have feathers. Well, why would it have feathers? It's a good question. Ostriches don't fly, but they have feathers, and they use that for keeping warm, because even in the African savanna, they are running at a very high temperature. They have to keep their body heat. They use it for display. Think about ostriches doing mating dances and things like that. They also try to ward off predators. And the feathers help your body look bigger than what it is. It's an effective way of saying, hey, look at me, I'm huge. And it's like, huh, you are. And they're like, sucker, right? Animals do this stuff all the time. Try and look big so that something won't eat you. Here's an interesting example of a dinosaur that was discovered in Mongolia. An oviraptor. These animals' names mean egg thief because when they were first discovered by American paleontologists in the 1920s, they thought that they were robbing the eggs of other dinosaurs. Turns out they were protecting their own nests. And we know that because this particular one, this is at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, has got the egg was opened up, and that is a baby of the same species. So this is a mother dinosaur that is sitting on top of her nest trying to protect it as a wave of sand and mud comes sweeping over it during the flood. And it sits on that, much like a bird sits on a nest and extends its arms out in order to cover it and brood. So this is an example of a flash moment in the behavior of an animal whose anatomical position makes sense if it has feathers. Feathers were not discovered on this particular one, but I think that's a good inference based on behavior and other similarities. The velociraptors from Jurassic Park, well, it turns out they probably, I would say, absolutely did have feathers. This is one of the fossils that was recovered from that 1920s expedition into Mongolia by the American Museum. Up over at the top here is an ulna. That's the forearm bone from Velociraptor. This bone's about this big. The real Velociraptor is a small animal about the length of the desk. And so it's about the size of a German Shepherd or a coyote in size. Jurassic Park Velociraptors are much bigger. You need a man-sized predator for a movie. I won't get into that. There's some good stuff that they did for that. Now, along the length of this ulna, the scientists in the 2000s, about 2012, I think it was, noticed that there were a series of little raised dimples on the ulna. And the only other animals on Earth that have a series of regularly spaced raised dimples are birds. Because not all birds do this, but this is, for example, a turkey vulture ulna. Turkey vultures, big birds, and they have very large feathers, and the bone grows these extra dimples out to form space for tendons to have more area to grab onto to help control the muscles of those feathers. So the only animals on Earth that have these little dimples on their ulna are animals with feathers, and a velociraptor skeleton from 1920 has got it. So I think that's a good inference over here. So we might have to start rethinking what velociraptor looks like. And that was one of the long complaints paleontologists had about Jurassic Park movies, is that they should have put feathers on the velociraptor. They decided, well, we didn't do that for the beginning. We'll keep these guys looking the way that they do, but the new dinosaurs will add in the feathers because now we know more, right? That's the idea. This was the specimen that changed my mind. I was deeply skeptical of the idea that dinosaurs had feathers when I was going through graduate school until 2003, with the discovery of this animal, Microraptor guai. Microraptor is a small raptor dinosaur similar to Velociraptor in a lot of ways. It's only about the size of a raven, maybe, a large crow, and about this long, about that tall. But it's definitely a Velociraptor type animal. It has the little sickle claw. It's got a skull that looks like it. But when it was discovered, it had this massive covering of plumage, including feathers that look very much like a wing. When we look at those under a variety of different types of lights, we have new methods of analyzing these fossils to make sure that they're legitimate and not forgeries or frauds. We can see those details going all the way straight to the bone, but not attaching to the bone itself, but being integument. And so other things have told us now. We even know the color of Microraptor. Inside feathers are little tiny structures called melanosomes. It means color body in Latin. And the shape of melanosomes are either rods or little balls. And the different shapes connect to the different colors that we see on the bird feathers. And melanosomes are preserved in these specimens of Microraptor. And so we know that Microraptor was covered in the iridescent black, blue, green types of feathers. I'm going to skip over a couple of things here because we're coming up on the end and come to a couple of conclusions about this. They don't have time to talk much about Archaeopteryx here. But what I will say about Archaeopteryx is that more and more of its anatomy is looking closer and closer to some of these raptor dinosaurs. Archaeopteryx has classically been understood as the first bird, but remember, that is an evolutionary assessment. To say that Archaeopteryx is the first bird means that there were no birds before it. And Archaeopteryx is a flying thing. It certainly is. It has feathers, but it also has feathers in arrangements that look a lot more like these little raptor dinosaurs than any birds that are alive today. And so I think the lesson that we can learn for creationists are the following. First off, is that many of these theropod dinosaurs have feathers or little filament structures that sure look like feathers in various forms. And it turns out there's actually some of the dinosaurs that are on the far other side, the duckbills. I didn't have a chance to show you one of those, but there's one of those that is covered in fuzz. And this thing's not supposed to be on that evolutionary connection to birds at all. It's as different from these things as Triceratops is. It's got fuzz, which might mean that fuzz and fluff and feathery material might be common to virtually all the dinosaurs. Now, we know that we have skin impressions from some other dinosaurs that don't have feathers. So not all dinosaurs had feathers. But in the same way, we might say that all mammals have hair, even though some mammals don't. Right? Elephants are generally hairless, as are rhinos and hippos. The whales have no hair. There's the naked mole rat. Don't look at that thing. It's hideous. It's horrible. Ugh. But we can say mammals have hair, except for in the few cases where they don't. And the cases where they don't are unusual cases. Elephants are giant, and they're trying to shed heat, and hair impedes that. so they're hairless. I think many of the large dinosaurs from which we have good skin impressions that don't show any feathers are mostly because dinosaurs likewise are warm-blooded, and they have to be concerned when they get really big with venting their heat, not keeping it. But if you're a smaller dinosaur, you get to keep your feathers. You get to keep your fuzz and your fluff, just like mammals keep their hair. I think this is a wow thing. This is not something for us to be worried about, that evolutionists got a few things right, therefore maybe they're right about everything. No. They were right about some things, and it's okay to say that. Our own models as creationists must be able to evaluate the data, and hopefully what we're seeing here is true data, legitimate data with minimal inference to it. There's always going to be some, but we want to make reasonable inferences. Our models, therefore, need to be robust, and they also need to be adaptable. The Word of God gives us the parameters around which our models are based. We have to rightly interpret the Word of God, but that platform is what we use to build the remainder of our architecture of science. But that architecture of science is something that needs to be able to change as the data come in. And so if we as creationists constantly say dinosaurs don't have feathers because dinosaurs didn't evolve into birds, we have accidentally combined two things that might not be connected to one another, because dinosaurs could have feathers and still not have evolved into birds. That is possible, and I think increasingly is the case in the situation. We also have to remember that any model, scientific model, is tentative. We hold on to some models tightly, like gravity. It's been tested over and over again. There's no reason to doubt gravity. But there's reason to doubt other sorts of things, and we want to make sure that we recognize the tentativeness of this. So there's lots of dinosaurs. There are numerous dinosaur taxa that cluster when I take a look at these baraminology methods, and I think Archaeopteryx clusters in with some of those dinosaurs that are feathered. It's part of a kind that's different from other bird kinds, because bird is not a kind. The Bible says that God created the oaf, that means birds and other flying things, bats and whatnot, according to their various kinds. There is no bird kind. There is no mammal kind. There is no dinosaur kind. There are kinds of dinosaurs and kinds of birds and kinds of mammals and kinds of jellyfish. So if we remember that, then we might not try to put such a hard-line distinction between these things and these things, because bird and dinosaurs are ideas that exist in our mind and our mind only. The real world does not have a bird. There simply are birds. So with that, we're come to the close. I don't want to jump too far anymore, because we got church service coming up in 10 minutes. But I'll be happy to chat for a couple of minutes while Dr. Calvin gets ready for service. Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, I'll be happy to stay. So thank you for those of you who are watching, by the way. And make sure that thank you guys for your attention today. And Lord bless you. See you another time.